Daryl's group arrives in Angers, where Isabel tells Daryl they can radio for directions on where they should head next, stopping in front of a theater. Daryl leaves the reins with Laurent and a rifle with Sylvie to protect the horse. Inside, Isabel explains that her contact in Angers is a musician who has been living in this theater for years. The conductor joins them, revealing that he speaks English, and leads them to his radio, which has some parts missing. The conductor explains that he used some parts for amplification. The conductor puts on a record, and he leads Daryl and Isabel into the main part of the theater, where he excitedly conducts an orchestra made out of mutilated walkers tied up to various instruments, having clearly gone insane. Outside, Laurent and Sylvie listen to the music with confusion as a walker, dragging a corpse that's been manacled to it, approaches. A frustrated Daryl states that they should have stuck to the plan, calling it a stupid detour. But Isabel believes that it was worth a try. As Isabel struggles to shoot the walker, Daryl and Isabel emerge from the theater, arguing about going to Paris, which Isabel believes to be too dangerous. It's too dangerous everywhere. We did it your way. Now we're gonna do it mine. We're going to Paris, Daryl proclaims, taking the rifle from Sylvie and shooting the walker in the head. The group rides off in their cart as a herd approaches, drawn by the music and the gunshot. Walking alongside the cart, Laurent asks Daryl if there will be walkers in Paris, which Daryl confirms is likely to be the case. Laurent notes that Daryl is good at fighting them, but Daryl dismissively tells him that everyone is good at something. Daryl brings the cart to a stop as Laurent looks out over Paris from a nearby vantage point, and Daryl welcomes the two women home. The group makes their way through the walker-infested streets of Paris, with Isabel and Sylvie pointing out various landmarks to Laurent, including the Pantheon and the ruins of Notre Dame. Daryl notices the word pouvoir and a crest written on a car, and Isabel explains that it's a movement that started after the global outbreak. Most of Paris is under the control of Janet and her guerriers, which Daryl recognizes as the guys who had attacked the Abbey of Saint Bernadette. In desperate times, people turn to order or to God. As the group makes their way through the Père Lachaise cemetery, Laurent tells Daryl about the famous people buried there and about a fable that one of them had written about a weary woodsman who wanted to die, but had a change of heart when death came, instead asking for help carrying his burden so that he can keep going on. Daryl stops to pay his respects to the grave of Jim Morrison, an American rock star who had died in Paris. Noticing Daryl's worried look, Laurent reassures Daryl that he won't die in Paris too. A little further on, the group spots 3 bodies in the process of being buried and are confronted by the survivors burying them. Isabel tells Philou Boucard, the man in charge, that truth is hope and that Père Jean had sent them. Philou realizes who Laurent is and asks after Père Jean, but Isabel admits that he isn't with them. Noticing Philou's suspicious look at Daryl, Isabel identifies Daryl as a friend who had helped them to get there and who only speaks English. Philou introduces himself and his companions, telling Laurent that they've been waiting a long time to meet him. Philou leads the group to his community living on a greenhouse roof, where Daryl asks for a radio that he can use. Philou explains that they take turns at the daily tasks and had welcomed their 64th member a few months before, who is a baby girl that was born. As Philou shows them around, Emile asks Sylvie if she had always wanted to be a nun, and she admits that she's never imagined anything else. Emile comments that Sylvie has never been to Paris before and it's a good place to imagine. In the garden, the group observes the Eiffel Tower in the distance, with Laurent telling Daryl how many rivets were used to build it, and Daryl noticing that the famous landmark got the tip knocked off of it. Philou explains that a military helicopter had crashed into it at the start of the outbreak, and Laurent muses that it must be magical to stand under it and look up at the sky. At Daryl's prompting, Philou leads Daryl and Isabel to Antoine, who is in charge of the community's homing pigeon method of communication, leaving Daryl incredulous. Antoine sends a message written by Isabel out, but admits that it could be anywhere from a few days to a month to get a response, factoring in bad weather. After confirming with Isabel that the nest will take her the rest of the way for the last part of the trip, Daryl declares that his part of the job is done, as a pigeon can't help him, and without a radio, they can't help him. Philou tells Daryl that there are people trading all kinds of things in Paris and he can take Daryl to them. However, they will need currency, as even information is a commodity. Daryl is willing to steal something if that's what it takes. but Isabel thinks that she knows where to find something and they'll go there in the morning. The three observe people presenting Laurent with gifts and Daryl is worried that it's a lot to put on a kid. But Isabel feels that God chooses our burdens. Laurent approaches Sonia, whose husband had died a few days before and has refused any food or comfort since. While Sonia has been inconsolable to everyone else, she accepts a hug from the boy, causing Falou to declare that Pergine was right about him. Stefan, having apparently recovered from the wounds that he had sustained fighting Daryl, arrives at the pouvoir base at Maison-Mere, pausing briefly to observe experiments being performed on one of the test subjects from the ship. Stefan meets with Janet, introducing himself and revealing that he's from Marseille. Stefan explains that a few years before, a traveler had come through the village and spoken of a movement in Paris that would make the world right again. The man gave Stefan the tattoo and told him that he was now a warrior for Janet. Stefan tells Janet that she can thank him later for getting her what she wants, the American, which she has already been told about. Stefan plays Daryl's recorded message that he had recovered from the Abbey for Janet. Stefan promises to find Daryl for her and to prove his usefulness to her here at Maison-Mere. Stefan swears to not stop, having promised his parents when they died to look after his brother, only to have Daryl make him a liar. Janet officially hires Stefan and leads him to the doctor's lab to observe his progress after other scientists injected the test subject with something. The doctor starts a timer and the group watches as the test subject, who is a cohort variant with pure black eyes, rips its chains out of the concrete walls that they are anchored to, charges the glass, and suddenly has blood explode out of its head and chest before collapsing. Once the walker stops growling, the doctor reports to Janet that it took 18 seconds, and she orders the doctor to continue his experiments. Daryl and Isabel make their way through Isabel's old apartment building, which is filled with its zombified residents. The two find Isabel's old apartment wrecked but clear of any walkers. Daryl notes the noisy neighbors and Isabel identifies them as the Garniers who had lived next door. Mrs. Garner had always been trying to set Isabel up with her son. Daryl finds a photo booth strip of Isabel and Quinn in one of the books, and Isabel identifies Quinn, stating that she was young and very stupid, and Daryl suggests that she upgraded with God. Isabel retrieves a picture of her sister Lily standing near the Eiffel Tower that was taken on Lily's 16th birthday, and Laurent has never seen his mother's face, stating that they're here so that she can keep her part of the bargain. Isabel retrieves the box full of her stolen merchandise from the fireplace, including drugs and a gold watch, which they can use as trade to get them information on a boat. Seeing how surprised Daryl is by her loot, Isabel quips that she wasn't always a nun. Isabel changes into some of her old clothes while Daryl enjoys the view from her apartment, which beats the view from his old house. Isabel recalls how there was a bar at the end of the street where only the regulars, which included artists, musicians, and students, were allowed to stay when the owner pulled the curtains. They thought that they were reinventing the world while never imagining how it would get. Daryl points out that Isabel at least thought about, while Daryl himself didn't do much thinking back then. While Daryl seems like someone who is always thinking to Isabel, he admits that he's not. Things happen and things change. Maybe we're the same that way, broken until the world ended, suggests Isabel, which Daryl agrees is a possibility. Isabel is glad that their paths crossed, and Daryl, seeing a walker in an apartment across the way, decides that they should get going. However, the two find the stairwell to be filled with walkers, and Isabel leads Daryl out through a service entrance in the back, which is overgrown with vines. Outside, the two find a zombified young girl tangled in vines and missing her nose. While Daryl draws his knife to put her down, Isabel stops him, recognizing the young girl as her former neighbor Amy. The two skirt around Amy, but the girl's attempts to reach out to Isabel knock over some flower pots. Drawing attention to them, zombified residents crash through their windows to get at Daryl and Isabel, as Daryl desperately tries to open a door which is blocked by more vines. As Isabel is caught between a burner and a small herd of at least 5 walkers, Daryl suddenly impales the burner in the back with a makeshift spear and holds it up against the vines, using the burner to melt through them. Once the door is open, Daryl stabs the burner in the head, recovers his dropped knife, and he and Isabel make their escape just as the small herd closes in on them. Isabel stops to take one last look at the still-trapped Amy, remembering driving away from the little girl on Monument Day along with Quinn and Lily. Waiting for the others to join them, Daryl expresses his condolences to Isabel about Amy, and Isabel sadly admits that she had left Amy behind when the outbreak started. Sylvie, Laurent, Falou, and Emile join them, and Isabel gives her nephew the picture of his mother, which Laurent shares with Daryl. Falou leads the group to the Paris catacombs where the guard lets them, in exchange for the group putting their weapons in the freezer. Falou explains to Daryl that the catacombs are where the 6 million people who died in the Black Death are buried. America is an infant, but here we survived many apocalypses. We will survive this one too, states Falou. The group reaches the Demiman nightclub where Falou tells Daryl that people find all sorts of things there, and since Daryl helped the Union of Hope, they will help him in return. Falou goes looking for some friends who might be able to tell something, while Isabel explains to Laurent that it's a nightclub and that they used to have a lot of them. Coco welcomes to the stage Anna, Valerie, and Laurent, Sylvie, and Emile enjoy her performance, while Daryl and Isabel admire a painting hanging on the wall that was saved from a museum. Sylvie and Emile dance together, and Emile explains that his grandmother was an Argentinian refugee who had taught him things to dance and to fight for freedom. Falou calls Daryl and Isabel over to Bernard, where they explain that Daryl wants to go to America, and since Daryl came by sea, there must be ships sailing. Bernard acknowledges that they hear things, and Rodo has Isabel show them what's in her bag, as someone watches them from a nearby balcony. Bernard is impressed with Isabel's stash and tells Daryl through Isabel that he knows people that can help him. Once Daryl pays him, Bernard promises to take Daryl to a connection who can hook him up. Daryl refuses after seeing the looks that Bernard and Rodo are exchanging with a man across the room, suggesting that they're about to double-cross him, and a fight breaks out between Daryl and Bernard after the latter pulls a knife on Daryl. Daryl quickly subdues Bernard before they are interrupted by Quinn, much to the shock of Isabel, reminding Bernard of the rules against weapons. Quinn slices the man's face in punishment before giving the knife to Coco. Quinn greets Isabel, admitting that it's strange to see her again after so many years, and she tells him that her life took some turns. Isabel identifies Daryl as her friend that she's traveling with, and Daryl explains that he's looking for a way back to America. Quinn reveals that it's not impossible to do and that he's heard things. While Anna finishes her performance and is complimented by Laurent on her singing, Laurent shares the picture of his mom with Anna and admits that he wants to see the Eiffel Tower in person himself someday, like Lily did on her birthday. Anna gives the boy her Eiffel Tower necklace to remember his mother by. Quinn agrees to ask around and see what he can find out for his old friend and rejects Isabel's offer of bartering with him. Laurent shows them the necklace that Anna had given to him, drawing Quinn's attention when Isabel reveals that he's Lily's son. Quickly pulling her friend aside, Isabel orders Sylvie to take Laurent back to the rooftop with the others, promising to explain later. Daryl asks if his friend is all right, but she just tells him that they made a deal and she'll keep up her end of the deal since Daryl kept up his end of it. Daryl was right. It turns out that Isabel does have connections in Paris. Quinn brushes off Anna's romantic advances and leads Daryl and Isabel to his office, explaining that the nightclub was originally a bunker in World War II that was occupied by both sides of the conflict. Isabel refuses a glass of champagne and reveals to her former boyfriend that she became a nun. Much to his surprise, Isabel admits that Lily had died giving birth to her baby, which Quinn appears to be genuinely upset by, much to Daryl and Isabel's shock. Quinn reveals that he's actually Laurent's father and he's angry that his son was kept from him. Isabel admits that Lily had never told her and accuses Quinn of being responsible for her sister's death, becoming aggressive while Isabel becomes more nervous and submissive. Quinn reminds Isabel that he'd saved her life after Isabel had slit her wrists in the bathtub. Quinn makes it clear that he'll only help Daryl if Isabel and Laurent stay with him, but Daryl refuses to abandon the two to Quinn for a boat. Leaving, Daryl tries to reassure Isabel that they all have bad things in their past that they're trying to run from, but Isabel angrily tells him that she was wrong earlier about them being the same. However, Daryl knows that he's not the one that she's really angry at. Isabel reminds Daryl that they're in Paris because Daryl had wanted to come and she's only trying to help Daryl keep his promise, accusing Daryl of only caring about that. Isabel asked for his help because she needed it, but she doesn't and never did need a hero. That night, lying in his bunk at Falou's community, Lauren asks Sylvie what it will be like at the nest, and she reassures him that it will be safe like it used to be at the Abbey, and there will be more people like them who believe the same thing. Lauren tells Sylvie that Sonia had told him that he had made her feel loved, and he doesn't know why. Sylvie explains that it's because Laurent gives people hope and leaves while Laurent studies the picture of his mother. Stefan arrives at Demymond with 2 armed Guerriers, and Quinn reminds Stefan of his arrangement with Janet that leaves the nightclub off limits to her people. Stefan reveals that they are looking for an American named Daryl Dixon who has been there. Daryl packs up his belongings, and Isabel apologizes for her earlier behavior, telling Daryl that she doesn't believe in coincidences, and Isabel believes that she had to come back to Paris to see Quinn again and find out the truth. Daryl brushes off Isabel, telling her that she's got Falou's people looking after her now and she doesn't need him anymore. Isabel tells Daryl that Laurent will be sad to see him go, but Daryl just tells her to make something up since she's really good at that. Isabel explains that she had never told Laurent the truth about his birth because everything about it was horrible, such as the way that Lily died and the way that Laurent was born. Daryl asks what Isabel will tell Laurent about Quinn because she needs to stop lying to him. Laurent deserves to know who he is, and he can then make up his own mind about what he wants to do. Isabel accuses Daryl of not accepting how special he is, but Daryl tells her he's a gift from God, right? Maybe that's something you need to believe, cause the world's so fucked up. Or maybe he's just a regular kid that got lucky and lived. Maybe that's your miracle. Having overheard their argument, a furious Laurent tells Daryl and Isabel that he hates them both and storms off. Guerriers led by Stefan burst in, demanding to know where the American is. Laurent escapes down some scaffolding while Stefan spots Daryl and chases after him, and Daryl orders Isabel to get Laurent and meet him back at her apartment. Daryl reaches the edge of the roof and pauses after spotting a herd below before jumping across to the next building. As Daryl makes his way across the adjacent rooftop, Stefan orders his men to track Daryl and follows Daryl across. Daryl ambushes Stefan, knocking the man's feet out from under him with his morning star and then trying to stab him. The 2 men engage in a vicious fight that ends with Daryl strangling Stefan from behind. However, before Daryl can kill the man, the Guerriers open fire on him, forcing Daryl to grab his weapons and flee. Isabel runs through the building, calling for Laurent. As Daryl hides, the roof beneath him suddenly gives way and Daryl falls into the building below. The end of episode 3. As soon as this video gets 300 likes and 30 comments, I will release the sequel.